Unsung Murder Ballads discusses topics of a graphic nature and in graphic detail and may not be suitable for children under 13. Listener discretion is advised.
In this episode of Unsung Murder Ballads, we want to add an additional trigger warning to all our listeners. This episode does discuss the sexual assault of minors, as well as crimes committed by members of the Catholic Church, and we realize that may be sensitive for some of our listeners. So just an additional kind of heads up and trigger warning, this is going to discuss some very brutal topics. Hello everyone, welcome back to the 10th episode of Unsung Murder Ballads. I am Janus Dead.
I'm Jameson Dead.
And I'm Joyous Dead.
Once again, we have the 3 J Deads. That's pretty cool.
Oh, I never noticed that. Sick alliteration.
Yes. Right.
We're hitting double-digit episodes here.
Yes, we are. And it's been an interesting ride. We've got a good number of listeners, a good number of downloads. We have another case suggestion coming up. So yeah, we're gonna have some fun with this.
Awesome.
All right. So today's case is the case of Sister Catherine Cesnik. And you really can't discuss her case without discussing the case of Joyce Malecki. So we'll also be I hate to say it this way, but adding that in, because unfortunately in the case of Joyce's case, it's not really pleasant. It hasn't really been looked into. She hasn't been given the due diligence that she deserves. And that's upsetting in a lot of ways. So as a result, she ends up kind of getting tacked on to the case of Sister Catherine Cesnik. Catherine Ann Cesnik was born on November 17th in 1942 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She is the eldest child of Joseph and Anna Cesnik. Catherine had 3 siblings. She attended St. Mary's School and St. Augustine High School, both in Lawrenceville, a suburb of Pittsburgh. She was valedictorian at the graduation of her high school class in 1960, after being made the May Queen, as well as the president of her senior class and the student council. Now, I didn't know what a May Queen was, so I had to look that up.
What is it?
Sounds like prom queen.
Yeah, I don't even know.
A May Queen is the person that leads a spring festival, like they're the head of the parade. And they're usually on a horse wearing a white dress to symbolize purity, and they often have a crown or a tiara.
Fun.
So, kind of like not quite the band leader, the person marching with the stick, but similar in that way. Like it's a place of high honor in that particular, parade and celebration.
So it's like a small town honor kind of thing.
Yeah, but this is Pittsburgh, so it's not.
All right, yeah, but I mean, I try to compare it to as far as that this is what they're doing. As far as it's not countrywide or anything like that.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, she's not Miss Pennsylvania, exactly.
Right.
Catherine was intelligent and beautiful. She joined the School Sisters of Notre Dame when she was 18. Now, the regimen at this school is similar to the military in that the young women that are learning to become nuns had to live a very structured, authoritative life. They're basically up at 5:15. They go to mass, they meditate, they have breakfast, they do their chores, and then they go to class. Which to me, that sounds like a lot before class.
Yeah. That's real early in the morning. I'm not into it.
Yeah, no,
especially at that age. I mean, like you're wanting to experience life, aren't you?
You would think so, but I mean, but at the same time, like this is only like the class that helps you become a nun. Again, I go back to, for me, it's like boot camp.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So they had to learn how to walk the correct way with their hands in their sleeves, with their eyes downcast, which I thought was kind of odd. Not that I think that nuns have ever been like at the forefront of the Catholic Church, but to learn to walk with your eyes cast down just seems archaic to me.
Yeah, that's the vibe, I guess.
Yeah. But Catherine was described as kind and very spiritual, and she was always there for those that needed her. She didn't take to the regiment immediately, but she did grow into it well. Now, something I didn't know, the nuns that graduate from this school, they take temporary vows, and it's only for a certain number of years. And when those years pass, they must then go renew their vows for life by taking what's called their final vows. So I had no idea that there was like a test phase.
Right. Interesting. I mean, it's a good idea for something that's so permanent. It makes sense to give it a trial run, but they don't do that with marriage.
No, they certainly don't.
I think
And
they should probably.
I mean, even the Night Watch in Game of Thrones, they gave you a couple months before you had to take your vows, which why
Mm-hmm.
anyone would take those vows would be beyond me. For the
For
Night's
real.
Watch, for the Night's Watch, not nuns.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, was there punishment or was there any kind of reprimanding if you decided not to go back for your final vows?
Honestly, I don't know. I don't think so, based on something I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But I mean, but you know, it's interesting. I just remembered there's even a part of the culture of the Amish where once you hit a certain age, the Amish, they're allowed, those teenagers or young adults are allowed to go out into the real world.
Rumspringa, that's what it's called.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. So I guess it's really there for everyone to make sure they're making the right lifetime decision. So
That's smart.
So in the spring of 1969, Catherine Cesnik was teaching drama and English at Archbishop Keogh High School in Baltimore. It's a private school, it's a Catholic school for girls, and it opened in 1965. So this is a relatively new school. Going forward, I will refer to this school simply as Keogh or Keogh High School because I'm not going to keep saying Archbishop Keogh every single time.
Fair enough.
And it would sound like I'm talking about a person. So
True.
So it should be noted that Baltimore in 1969, as well as today, is a blue collar and largely Catholic city. Keogh High School at the time was new, which I said, and it basically looked like many schools that were built during that time period. It's a multi-level box, but this one had the latest equipment. It had a large gym, a really good outdoor field for sports. It was considered a nice school at the time, and you had to be accepted into the school. So that was a big deal for the kids, the girls that did get accepted in. The school was run by nuns, Sister Catherine being one of the younger ones. It was very strict, and the girls that attended were expected to be orderly and well behaved. The school song even had the phrase, quote, "We are women of a new age," unquote.
Oh, interesting. That's weird vibes.
Yeah, it was very, very ahead of its time in a lot of ways, especially for a Catholic school. But as you're going to see, really not. Sister Catherine was relatively young. She was about 25 and closer to the age of the students than the rest of her peers. And the younger girls really looked up to Catherine. Catherine was approachable, and the students didn't feel that same way towards the other nuns. They didn't feel they could go to them with any of their problems, but they felt that they could with Catherine.
She's the friend teacher.
Correct. And she was considered their favorite teacher pretty much by all the students. The students described her as upbeat and happy and having more energy than anyone else. Many wondered why such a beautiful woman would have chosen to become a nun. And some of the photos that are out there of her, I'm like, yeah, why would she become a nun? But you know, I can't. Who can say what a person really needs in their life? So
yeah, true. I mean, I don't understand many of the reasons for doing that, so who knows?
She clearly chose to, and maybe it wasn't for the best. Yeah, we'll see. The young girls would talk to her about just about everything. Sometimes Catherine would give them advice, other times she would just listen. Catherine had also befriended a priest by the name of Gerald Koob. They had met in 1966 and had become very close. As Koob describes it, they were soulmates and developed a deep love for one another. They wrote one another letters and generally kept the nature of their relationship a secret, as obviously they couldn't really act on anything. Koob states that at one point, as Catherine's temporary vows were nearing their end, and he was only 1 year away from being ordained as a priest, he suggested that they both leave the clergy and get married.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's where I go back to Jameson with the whether or not there were consequences. I don't think there would have been, or if there were, it wouldn't have been hard enough for them to just walk away.
Okay, all right.
But Catherine did say no, stating that they were both meant to be in the church. You know, Koob,
I feel like that's going to come
dedicated.
back and bite them somehow.
Well, this is a murder podcast. And normally the first person we're talking about is either the killer or the victim. So usually like that should be a dead giveaway. No pun intended. So Koob also stated that Catherine had contacted him and said there was something really important she needed to talk to him about, and that they made plans to meet on November 8th. He was obviously hopeful that she wished to revisit his earlier suggestion. Now, as far as the school, as far as Keogh goes, there were not many priests at that school. Only Joseph Maskell, the chaplain and counselor, and Neil Magnus, who oversaw the students' Christian education. Now, quick history lesson on the life of Joseph Maskell. He was from a religious Irish American family. His mother was essentially grooming him from an early age to be a priest. She would literally sew vestments into his clothes and have him perform mass for other kids in the neighborhood.
That
That's
sounds like
weird.
a miserable childhood.
Yeah, can you imagine your buddies are over playing like basketball or baseball and you're sitting there pretending to be a priest?
Yeah, no.
That is
Uh-uh.
not fun.
His mother even went so far as to separate out the white like Necco wafer candies,
Are you kidding me? Oh my
and
God.
she used them as a mock host for his
Oh
little
my
mock communion.
God.
Can you imagine?
That is weird behavior.
From his mother. It's not even like he chose to do it. So Maskell, yeah, right. So Maskell earned his degree at Towson State University in psychology, and he got a counseling certificate from Johns Hopkins. He was officially ordained as a priest in 1965. From 65 to 66, he was assigned to the Sacred Heart of Mary in Baltimore. In 1966, he was transferred to the St. Clement Church, which was adjacent to the Keogh High School. He was a pastor there and supervised a Boy Scout troop. One altar boy from that church would later report that he saw Father Maskell take a handgun out of his pocket one time before going out to perform mass.
What the hell?
The altar boy asked Maskell why he was carrying a gun. You know, he's a priest. And he was given the coldest stare down he had ever seen.
Jeez.
Now, that same altar boy, who grew up to be a police officer and was interviewed on the documentary The Keepers, he stated that he would never see that kind of stare again until he was dealing with violent criminals as a cop. So that should tell you a lot right there.
Oh yeah, that's foreboding.
Yeah. So Maskell was also the chaplain for the police department, the National Guard, and the state police. So kind of going back to things we've talked about in other episodes of this podcast, we are now talking about a Catholic priest with friends who are in the police and the military. So when we talk about protection and power, this is the kind of thing we're talking about.
See, now
Mhm.
he can pay somebody to screw up the scene and forget evidence instead of the police doing it on their own. They can get paid to do it.
Well, he's a priest. He doesn't have to pay you to do it.
You
He
know,
can just
but
forgive you for your
he
transgressions.
has the power. He can give you whatever you want and just make it go away.
But he
you know,
doesn't
'cause
have, but he's not rich. He doesn't have access to that kind of stuff.
He's a priest. He can find ways.
I don't know. We'll see as this plays out. But I'm not sure that I think priests have the access to the kind of resources that you're referring to. But what do I know? I haven't been in a church
He
for a very long
sounds
time.
shady to begin with. So I mean, I'm thinking worst case scenario regardless. So
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to get into that right now. On November 7th, 1969, Sister Catherine left the apartment she shared with her friend and roommate, Helen Russell Phillips, generally known as Sister Russell. And they lived at a place called the Carriage House Apartments at 131 North Bend Road in Cantonsville, I'm assuming Maryland. And she left to go to the Edmonton Village Shopping Center. She was going to purchase an engagement gift for her sister who had just gotten engaged. She was going to a jewelry store. On her way, Catherine cashed her paycheck at the First National Bank, and she made a purchase at a place called Molly's Bakery. Now, later, residents at her apartment would notice Catherine sitting in her car at approximately 8:30 that night, reporting that it looked like she was waiting for someone. A student from the school, now this is an interesting little tidbit here. I didn't go into it in my notes, but in the documentary, they went a little more into it. A student at her school was the phone book had come out, and she went in and looked up the name of a teacher that she had a crush on. And she went to this guy's house to like see where he lived. And
Oh dear.
she heard a woman screaming in the direction of Catherine's apartment. At this point, she's only a couple blocks away. She heard someone yelling, and she heard an angry man's voice, and she thought it was violence. So she got the hell out of there and went home. And this was around that same time.
Interesting.
Now, the police stated that later a witness would come forward that claims to have seen a man driving Catherine's car with her in the passenger seat trying to exit the vehicle. But there's nothing to substantiate that. At around midnight, Sister Russell became concerned enough because Catherine hadn't returned that she called Gerald Koob. Now, Koob has stated that he had gone to Baltimore to see the movie Easy Rider with a fellow priest named Peter McKeon. They had, at that point, at midnight, they were back at their apartment discussing the movie when Sister Russell called asking if they had seen Catherine. The two priests immediately got in their car and drove to the nun's apartment. Koob and McKeon listened to what Sister Russell had to say for almost an hour, and Koob finally suggested that they call the police. A single police officer came to the apartment and took their statement, and then he just left.
She's a runaway, remember.
Oh God, not the runaway nun.
Right? That sounds like a plot for something completely different.
Yeah.
After another hour or so, the two priests left, but decided to take a walk, according to their reports.
Huh.
It's around 4:40 a.m. and McKeon and Koob find Catherine's car illegally and haphazardly parked across the street from her apartment complex. It's literally ass end sticking out into the street. The door is unlocked, so the two men open the car. Hanging from the little directional bar next to the steering wheel is like a twig, like a little tree branch. There are leaves and other twigs throughout the car, as well as the tires being muddy. There's also mud on the brake pedal, but not the accelerator. This would lead investigators to think that the person who drove Catherine's car may have used 2 feet to operate it. They also found in the car, the bank receipt from her cashing her check and like buns or rolls that she bought from the bakery. The gift she bought for her sister for the engagement, the jewelry, was not in the vehicle. So it's unclear whether or not she actually got there to buy it or not. Immediately after her disappearance, police, once it was reported, and they found the car, police did search the area for her body, for her body or otherwise, without any success. Now, 3 or 4 days after Sister Catherine goes missing, a young woman by the name of Joyce Malecki, who's 20 years old, also goes missing. Similar situation. The car was found on the side of the road, door open, keys in the ignition, items that were left behind the vehicle, no sign of a struggle, but she's just gone. She lived less than 2 miles from where Sister Catherine lived. Both women had recently been shopping before their disappearances. Joyce's body was found the following day by 2 hunters. She was found on an isolated back road in a wooden area 25 or 30 yards from the road in the I'm going to butcher this, Patuxent River. Joyce's remains were found face down in the water. Her hands were bound behind her back and her throat had been cut. Her parents were too upset to go down to identify her body, so it fell to her brother to be the one to have to go down and see her in that state and confirm that it was her.
Oh, that's awful.
Police stated that they did have a fingerprint from the car, but no matches in their system for it. They also claimed that they had forensics evidence under Joyce's fingernail, suggesting that she had fought for her life. But again, no, I mean, this was the 1960s, so there's not really a DNA database, but they still had this evidence.
But
Mhm.
even if there was, it would take forever for anything to come back.
And if they didn't have a match on the fingerprint, it's unlikely they would have a match for the DNA,
Right.
especially in the 60s. Okay, the community was outraged at the two cases, and the FBI came out and stated that they were investigating them, and if there was a connection between the two, they would find it. Captain John Barnard, chief of homicide for the Baltimore City Police, was the person in charge of the investigation. He is quoted by the newspaper stating that, quote, there was no evidence of foul play
Hmm.
in Sister Catherine's case.
Oh, I was
Yeah.
going to be like, wait a minute, hold on,
wait.
what?
Sorry, I realized I should have said that. Barnard kept downplaying the severity of the situation. The students of Sister Catherine reported that they were confused and frustrated and unable to make sense out of any of it.
Mhm.
Now, Father Koob had gone on record during that time that his mind was a whirlwind of conflicting, torturous thoughts. On the one hand, he hoped that she was alive. But if she's alive, where is she? What are her circumstances? Is she being held captive, tortured, etc.?
Mhm.
But on the other hand, he couldn't handle the thought of her being dead. So he was just a disaster at this point in time.
Mhm.
Months go by with no further evidence, leads, nothing. And on January 3rd, 1970, Catherine's body was found by a hunter and his son in this sort of informal landfill, which was located on Monumental Road in a remote area of the area called Lansdowne. This remote area was not visible from the road, so whoever dumped Catherine's remains there had to have known the area. She was found 20 yards from the road, laying on her back, stripped to the waist, on a hill with blunt force trauma to her skull.
Oh, that's awful.
Lieutenant James Scannell was the person that took the call, and he was the first person on the scene. He believed that she was killed elsewhere and dumped at the site. Now, the medical examiner that they called in was a guy by the name of Dr. Spitz. This guy has one hell of a record. His resume blows me away.
For the better or worse
He
or
worked
weird or what?
all of the above.
Okay.
He worked on JFK,
Oh, okay.
Martin Luther King, the Memphis Three, the Norfolk Four, and more recently for us, the Casey Anthony case.
Whoa.
Holy crud.
Yeah,
Okay.
so this guy's resume is amazing.
Wow.
He knows
That's
his shit.
insane.
Yeah. So he was at the crime scene and he's instructing the crime photographer on which pictures to take. And he determined that Catherine had been sexually assaulted and struck in the head with a heavy blunt object. Police would conclude that Catherine had been abducted by a stranger from the shopping mall.
Hmm.
The police. This is the police, not Dr. Spitz. We'll get into more of his stuff later. The assailant then killed her and dumped her body 5 miles away from where she was last seen. The police completely ignored the fact that somehow her car had been driven back near her home, but not left where she might have normally have parked it, which opens a whole bunch of questions.
Right.
Now, the case at this point sadly goes cold for a very long time, like decades.
Wow.
Yeah. So now we need to talk about someone by the name of Jean Weiner. Her maiden name was Hargadon, which is what she would have been known as when she was a student at this school. So we're going to go into a little bit of her history here. Jean was born in Baltimore, and she was from a huge Catholic family. She literally had 9 siblings. It went 3 older brothers, then her, followed by 3 younger brothers, then 2 sisters, and lastly, the youngest brother.
Wow.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. All her brothers were altar boys. That's how Catholic they were.
Extremely.
Does that make her an altar girl?
I don't think those exist.
I think they exist now. Maybe they
th
didn't back then.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm pretty sure they exist now, but I don't know enough about.
Haven't been to church in a real long
Yeah.
time.
I was going to say I haven't been to church in a very, very long time. Her mother was very devout, and the priests were essentially the authority in her children's lives. They did not question what a member of the clergy told them to do. So when Jean was a freshman at Keough, she went and made confession one day at the school. And this is the moment that changes Jean's life forever. She was afraid to enter the confessional, and it took her numerous attempts to finally build up the courage to do so. When she did, she told the priest that she had been sexually abused by her own uncle when she was younger. It had since ended, but she had this lingering guilt about it, so she wanted to confess it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, poor thing. That's awful.
The priest she was speaking to was Father Magnus. He asked her what her name was, and he asked if he could look at her. Now, Jean, who was 13 or 14 years old at this time, she internalized what was happening, and she had thought that what she had confessed to him must have been so terrible that the priest needed to break the protocol of the confessional and needed to see her and know who she was.
Oh, poor thing.
This piece of absolute shit says to the girl, I don't really know if God can forgive this.
Are you kidding me?
Magnus then tells her he needs to pray on it and he will get back to her. A couple weeks later, Magnus approaches her in the hall and told her to go to his office. Magnus told her that the things that had happened with her uncle were not done to her, but she had made those things happen.
God damn it.
What kind of twisted? Oh my God.
Yeah, he tells her that she was so bad that it would take time to know if God would forgive her. And he told her that she needed to empty herself of these sinful behaviors to make room for God. At which point, he began sexually assaulting her.
Oh my God.
Having her perform oral sex on him and claiming that his semen was like the Eucharist and would make the symbol of the cross over her with his penis.
Holy crud.
Ugh.
He told her that she should swallow his semen because it was like the Holy Spirit.
Oh, what a disgusting.
That's
Oh
horrific.
God.
Guys, this is just the beginning.
Oh
What?
God.
So
Oh
buckle up.
no.
Jean was incredibly young and naive, and she trusted this supposed man of God.
How
And
old was she at this point?
13 or 14.
Oh God.
She did not realize that this was abuse.
What did she think it was?
The priest helping her get rid of her sin. Keep in mind, her mother
Yeah. Oh,
had basically set her up for this. Like, her mother didn't mean for this to happen, but by basically saying that these priests are the all-time authority in your life, that they're never going to question what a priest tells them to do. So after a couple more of these therapy sessions with Magnus, Father Maskell joined them in the office one day. Maskell almost immediately began showing anger towards Jean, calling her a whore, and scaring the shit out of her. The two men began assaulting Jean at the same time, always under the guise of trying to help her in the name of God.
Awful.
I'm trying not to throw up.
I gotcha. So at one point, when Jean reported for her sessions, Magnus was no longer there, and it was just Jean and Maskell. He was very angry with her for not getting better, and he began raping her.
Oh God.
The saddest part of this abuse is that Jean has stated that at the time, she kept hoping that each time maybe God would finally forgive her.
Oh.
One time, Maskell even took out a vibrator. And although Jean didn't know what it was, he told her it was time for her to participate in her own therapy. He used the vibrator on her.
Oh.
And even though she begged him to stop, he refused, saying things to her like, let's see how much the whore likes it.
Oh God.
The crazy part is Jean did, in fact, have an orgasm, even though she had no idea what it was or meant at that time.
Yeah, that's pretty common in survivors of rape and sexual assault.
Is it really?
Yeah, it's because it's like a physical response that your body can't control. It's like the same way that, when a man or someone with a penis is raped, that sometimes that happens to them and they can't help that they, have an erection. And that's one of the reasons people will often victim blame male victims because it's like, oh, well, why did you have an erection if you didn't want it? It's really fucked up, but it's just a physical response.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah. There's some sexual assault facts today. We're educating as well as
Yeah.
trigger warning.
Yeah, I have a feeling this is going to educate us a lot, or educate people a lot. The kids at home are going to learn a lot today.
Oh.
When that was done, Maskell then said to Jean, "You hated that, and I'm glad." And then he sent her back to class.
Well, that's just sadistic.
Now, keep in mind, all of these things that we're talking about are things that Jean would remember decades later. So this is all from her accounts. So Jean stated that each time she left, she would hear the door click close behind her. And it was like she forgot everything that happened prior to the door closing. It was almost like hypnotic suggestion kind of thing where she heard that noise and it was all in the past and she just went about her day like normal, which
I mean, I guess she had to do that to survive.
Right. Just instant repress.
Yeah. To me, it's absolutely crazy.
Yeah, it is.
How many times do you think she dreams about that noise?
That's a crazy thought right there. I have no idea. That noise would probably, think about that. Like if you're dead asleep and like you hear a door close in that same click, you would wake up terrified.
Yeah. Yep.
One time she was wandering the halls after one of these sessions and she couldn't remember where she was supposed to be. Sister Catherine approached her and asked her where she was supposed to be, and Jean told her that she didn't know, and Sister Catherine helped her find her class. Sometime after this, Jean was about to enter Maskell's office, and Sister Catherine happened to be passing by. Catherine said hello to her, and then said that she hadn't been aware that Jean needed the services of Father Maskell. Then the door opened, and Maskell was allowing Jean to enter, and Sister Catherine looked at him and said, "I wasn't aware that she needed these services." And Maskell responded something like, "Yes, we've been very effective," and then closed the door in her face.
Huh.
Well, now you got somebody else involved. Now somebody else is starting to question stuff. So
it's good at least, but we all know it's not going to end well.
Jean stated that she believes, looking back, that Sister Catherine was letting Maskell know that she was observing him. And Jean has also stated that she thinks Catherine was watching a number of the other girls as well. Fucked up side note here. Maskell has his degree in psychology. Remember that. He started making the students watch a Sean Connery and Tippi Hedren movie called Marnie as part of the curriculum for the religion class. The basics of this movie is that the character of Marnie has these repressed memories and doesn't function the same way most people do. She has problems with intimacy, etc. Now, Sean Connery's character grows to love her despite her quote-unquote problems that she suffers from. A big part of this movie is that Marnie talks about her problems with a doctor and a psychiatrist, and she eventually finds love. Maskell clearly used this as a subtle means of encouraging these girls to seek him out for guidance.
Oh, ew, what a disgusting man.
Numerous students would come forward years later to talk about what Maskell had done to them. And the stories all pretty much have a common theme. You've sinned, now you need to be punished, etc. All these girls he chose to abuse, he was more than aware that of what their lives were and what they had gone through. He purposely chose them because he knew they were vulnerable and easy to control. The students, sorry, I know it's so hard. This is so frustrating. Like I wish I could go back and just beat the crap out of this guy.
Yeah, for real.
The students, as adults, have stated that Maskell would just get on the loudspeaker and directly say, "So-and-so to my office now." And the women have described the feeling of hearing their names spoken by him as just pure trauma.
Oh, yeah, that's so completely awful.
One girl, upon hearing her name called, began crying and saying to the nun, the teacher, that she didn't want to go. And the nun said to her, I know he's weird and all, but you have to go.
Oh, if she only
Oh.
knew.
Well, I wonder how much she did now.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, who knew what and when? That's really the big question on a lot of these cases, but this one in
Mm-hmm.
particular. A student by the name of Teresa Lancaster, who had been a straight A student when she arrived at Keogh and had always wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer, stated that when your name was called over the loudspeaker, the room would just become silent and the other girls would look at you with sad eyes and the teachers would look down.
So
Teresa
they knew what was going on here.
Teresa believed the nuns knew something was going on. And they had to know. And they didn't take any action. But then again, what could they do?
Right. True.
I hate to say it, if it was a public school, it probably would have been very different.
Right. Yeah, but at least there's escalation.
Correct. And I mean, again, they would, and I believe the nuns would understand better than even we do of the insular nature of the Catholic Church. And like this is a Catholic school. So that insulation still exists to protect their people. So Teresa, she had described her younger self as a nerd that wanted to be a hippie.
Okay. All
Right.
right.
So one day her parents had found a pot pipe, like a bowl pipe in her purse, and they were really upset with her. So the next day at school, Teresa went to Father Maskell thinking he could help her.
Oh, God.
Maskell came close to her and said that he wasn't supposed to touch students, but he felt it was necessary in this case.
Ugh.
Teresa then stated that things just went from bad to worse with Maskell. She said that Maskell spoke with her father and smoothed things over and convinced this very Catholic man that he was going to save his daughter.
Ugh.
Maskell told her father that Teresa was going to have to go see a gynecologist named Dr. Christian Richter. Dr. Richter initially prescribed douches 3 times a week for young Teresa.
Ew, what the fuck?
And Maskell told her that she could use them in his office and that he would help her.
Okay, that's just wrong.
Maskell would administer the douche to Teresa.
Mhm.
At one point, Maskell told her parents that she might be schizophrenic and that he managed to get her prescribed Thorazine. Now, Thorazine is a strong drug used on schizophrenics. Maskell told her, quote, "This is going to help you release the devils from your brain," unquote.
Wow, that's disgusting.
We're now returning to the student named Jean that we had spoken about earlier. So Jean stated that during her sophomore year, Maskell began bringing other people into the room during her sessions. One of the things that Jean told Maskell was that during the abuses that her uncle put her through, her uncle would let other men assault her while he stood by the door.
I'm just soaking all this in and just like can't believe the torture and the manipulation and the psychology that goes into all of this.
And this is brutal. Because her uncle would let other men assault her and stand by the door, Jean, being younger and not really understanding everything, had started to imagine that her uncle being there at the door was meant to protect her, not keep other people from entering the room.
Okay, that's
So-
twisted.
Yeah, so her psychology here is really, really like backwards.
Yeah.
So when Maskell started bringing other men into the room, Maskell would stand at the door just as her uncle had done. One person Maskell allowed to assault Jean was a man he called Brother Bob. Brother Bob was violent towards Jean, and while raping her from behind one time, it was clear that he did not intend to pull out. Maskell had to grab him and said to him, "You need to be careful. This pup comes from a whole litter of pups." Now remember, she had 9 siblings, and Maskell was all too aware that her parents were very fertile and had a lot of kids. So he's basically telling this guy, be careful, you're going to impregnate this one.
Right. Yeah.
Jean stated that one of the men Maskell allowed into the room was a police officer in full uniform.
Of course it was.
Jean's own father was a police officer. That's even more like that's
Like
another
the guy probably
layer.
knows her dad. Probably works with her dad. That's
I was
awful.
just about to say, were they in the same unit or?
Well, I mean, Baltimore's a pretty big city, so maybe not. I mean, there's
That's
a lot
true.
of police in a city like that. One day, Maskell took a gun, emptied all the bullets out of it one by one, and told Jean that if her father ever found out that she was quote unquote whoring around, Maskell put the gun to her temple and pulled the trigger. And he then said that's what Jean's father would do to her, only he would leave the bullets in the gun.
Oh God. That's ew.
One student named Donna reported, again years later as an adult, that one time Maskell brought in a police officer, but the officer kept saying he didn't want to do it, and Maskell kept encouraging him to do it.
Oh, that's disgusting.
Donna also reported that Maskell would hypnotize her sometimes, and that she still has no memories of what happened during these sessions.
Oh, probably for the best.
Teresa stated that on Halloween night 1970, Maskell called her parents and told them that the police were going to take her and a friend of hers on a police run with him and some officers. They drove the girls to a lover's lane type of place, and the girls watched as the police made teen couples that were there break up and, sent them on their way. Maskell then told Teresa's friend to get out of the car, and then Teresa was raped by 2 police officers.
Oh God.
One student, Lillian Hughes, or Lil, was called to Maskell's office, and he told her that he needed someone he could trust that would keep information about other students confidential, and that she would be typing notes about his psychology counselings with them. In exchange for this, Lil would be able to get out of tests, classes, etc. She stated that so much of what she was typing was sexual, involving incest and bestiality and diseases and so forth. She also stated that many of the things that she was typing involved Maskell, was of him bringing these girls to see a gynecologist. Lil said that she was obviously naive to how inappropriate any of that was, but also she was made to feel important by someone who was important in the school.
Mm-hmm.
So again, a nice move in terms of manipulation on his part. Now, Lil also stated that he would sometimes hypnotize her, and that she also suffers from gaps in her memories. She said that Maskell would always give her some Coca-Cola in a paper cup when she went into his office, and she's certain that he was putting something in the drink now, looking back.
Oh yeah, that makes sense. Oh, gross.
One student had been called to Maskell's office after school had already let out for that particular day. She happened to be in class with her own sister and sister Catherine. The student said that she looked at Catherine with a panicked look on her face when she heard her name over the speaker, and sister Catherine turned and told Maskell that the student was going home as the day had already finished. One day at the end of the school year in 1969, before summer vacation was about to begin, Jean had forgotten something in class and had gone back to retrieve it and encountered Sister Catherine. Catherine started up a basic conversation with Jean and asked how she was liking Keogh High School. When Jean said that she didn't like it, Catherine asked if there was something in particular that she didn't like. Now, Jean, not wanting to talk about it, tried to be evasive, but Sister Catherine was smarter than that. Catherine suggested that maybe she would ask Jean questions, and Jean could simply just nod or shake her head. Jean agreed. Now, I just want to point something out that's hugely important here. With the suggestion I feel like Sister Catherine made to this girl, Jean, is equally as adept as Maskell is at manipulating people, except Catherine's using her powers for good.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they both understand people and they know how minds work and thoughts work. Honestly, it blows my mind that one of them is there to help others and the other one's only there to help themselves. It just, to me, it's almost like two supervillain, like a superhero and their matching supervillain.
Yeah, they're like foils.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Well, I mean, it's smart too that she feels she's aware that it may be hard for her to talk about this, so she says, just nod. You don't have to say anything, just nod.
Right, and that's what I mean. Like, she's so good at it, but in a good way, whereas Maskell's so good at it, but in that bad way. Sister Catherine asked Jean if someone was making her do something she didn't want to do. Jean nodded and looked away. Sister Catherine then asked if it was a priest. Jean looked at her and nodded again. Catherine then said that she thought as much and hugged Jean and said to her, "I'm going to take care of this." So the school year ended and the students had summer break. When they returned in the fall of 1969, Sister Catherine was no longer a teacher there, but Maskell was. Jean was called to Maskell's office. He confronted Jean, asking if she had been telling people that he was hurting the girls and making them do things they didn't want to do. Jean is, of course, terrified and staring at the floor, but she denies it. Maskell tells her that he needs to remind her who the real whore in the room is. He assaults her and then tells her to remember who has the whoring mouth.
Jesus.
Yeah, this guy's fucking awful. Now, during that summer, Catherine had proposed to the powers that be that the nuns weren't as in touch with their students and what they were going through as they should be, as there is a clear divide between the students and the regular world and the nuns in the convent. Like, there's clearly a big divide there. So Catherine got permission to live in an apartment outside the convent with Sister Russell. And at this point, Catherine began teaching in a public school, but as a nun. 2 days before Catherine disappeared, 2 students from Keogh stopped into her apartment to speak with her. When Catherine asked how things were going, implying with Maskell, the students were hesitant to answer. Catherine told the girls, "Things will be taken care of. Don't worry." Another unnamed student and her boyfriend had also gone to see Catherine the day before her disappearance and began telling her everything. At some point during this, Maskell and Magnus entered without knocking, and Sister Catherine told the students to leave. The next day, Maskell called that student to his office and threatened to kill the girl, her boyfriend, and both of their families if they said anything.
What the fuck?
That's crazy.
Now, Father Koob, who had plans to meet Catherine on the 8th of November in hopes that they, might leave the church together, has stated that if Catherine had been aware of these abuses, then it's obvious to him now that this important thing that she needed to discuss with him was obviously the abuses of these kids. Jean stated that the day after Catherine went missing, she was called to Maskell's office. He told her that Catherine was missing, but that he knew where she was. Maskell asked Jean if she wants him to take her to Catherine, and she says yes. He drives her to a barren area, and they walk up a hill, and he brings her to Catherine's body. Jean says that before she knew what she was doing, she was kneeling at Catherine's side. There were maggots on her face, and she began wiping them away. Maskell then reportedly leaned down next to Jean and said, "Do you see what happens when you say bad things about people?"
Oh my God. Wow. That's just like a new level of fucked up.
It's like, this just makes me so angry. Like, what this woman went through blows my fucking mind.
Insane.
Well, the fact that he didn't try to do anything to her, kill her, do anything to Jean out there, that's a freaking miracle in and of itself.
Oh, we're gonna get into that too.
Oh.
So the police would dispute Jean's claim of wiping away maggots because they said that maggots can't survive in the winter. And keep in mind, this is November and December. However, the autopsy report done by Dr. Spitz showed that there were maggots in Catherine's mouth and trachea. And when researchers went back to look at this time period, it was an incredibly warm early winter, those particular months. They were in the high 50s and low 60s. So it's entirely possible. But the police immediately dismissed what Jean was saying when she first remembered it decades later. So
of course they did, because why wouldn't they?
I mean, keep in mind, it's a Catholic city, and we're talking about the Catholic Church. So Jean stated that after having seen Catherine's body, she was brought to Maskell's office, and Maskell left her alone with Brother Bob. Brother Bob, according to Jean, told her that he killed Catherine because Catherine was going to go to the police. He also told Jean that it was her fault Catherine needed to be killed. He then raped her.
God.
He then raped her, and when Maskell re-entered the room, Brother Bob confirmed from Maskell that Jean wouldn't tell anybody anything. Jean has stated numerous times in the documentary, The Keepers, that she doesn't understand why she never said or did anything about what she knew. She said that all she knew is she was terrified and believed she disassociated it and didn't remember any of it for 20 years or more.
Wow, that's the power of the human mind to try and protect itself. It's really crazy.
It is. It's incredibly powerful. At the end of Jean's senior year, she met her future husband, Mike Wager. She graduated, moved on, married Mike, and had a family. And amazingly, in my opinion, she remained spiritual and a religious person. But I guess
That
if
is
you're,
that takes a
crazy.
lot.
yeah, but I mean, I guess if you're forgetting everything, that's probably a big part of it.
Yeah, true. When you're just burying it.
And that, my friends, is where we're going to end it for the week. Join us next week for part 2. But yeah, so thanks everyone for listening. We'll see you next week. I am Janus Dead.
I'm Jameson dead.
I'm Joyous dead.
And we'll see you next week. Bye.